Hope changes everything. The Hope Scholarship at Rhode Island College is the best, most affordable way for Rhode Islanders to earn a bachelor's degree in more than 70 different majors. It's a high-quality 4-year degree with the last 2 years tuition free. That's right, the full college experience for half the price, with new in-demand majors in cybersecurity, sports management, and biotechnology, and starting next fall, AI. Learn more at ric.edu/hope. Hello, everybody. Welcome to Brewing Boundaries. I'm your host, Lindsay Idaluca, and I am very happy to be celebrating Pride Month for June. Today, our guest is Dr. Michelle Crossley, who I'm biased. I really love her because she's one of my professors at Rhode Island College, who also sponsors this podcast. So shout out to Rhode Island College. But I'm really excited to have her on today because she works with would you say adolescents mostly or all ages?
It's really all ages from across the lifespan. Mm-hmm.
Okay. So, yes, she works with people across the lifespan when it comes to gender and gender fluidity. And it's something that is definitely a topic that people are sometimes scared to talk about because they aren't educated on the fact. So I'm really happy to have you on our podcast today. Thank you.
Thank you for having me and asking.
Absolutely. So here's a question for you. You know, when you're starting off and you're trying to figure out exactly what your niche is as a therapist, what was it that kind of brought you to this area of expertise in particular?
It's a good question, and Lindsay, I know that we talk a lot about stuff in class, so I don't think this will surprise you, but it really started as a way to talk about uncomfortable things with my cohort in my doctoral program.
Okay.
Going to a university in the South, where we didn't have even an LGBTQ plus center for students, and really looking at the topics that our faculty member asked us to talk about, all around multiculturalism, and I was just not excited about any of them. And then I went to a committee meeting on campus, and there was a transgender student who spoke, and she actually had put forth some legislation in the state that required any newly constructed state-owned building must have a gender-neutral bathroom. And recognizing like her challenges as being somebody who was assigned male at birth, larger body stature, trying to navigate this really conservative campus. So it was through that, and then I connected with her, and then I coerced, I would say, my colleagues, my peer colleagues, into doing our project on trying to use more trans-informed practices. And so that's really where it started.
Yeah, and then it grew from there. You saw your practice because while you are a professor, you are a practice. You have your own private practice, and this is a population that you work with often.
Absolutely. And so it's a good point. It's when I came, we moved back up here. I started working in the field, and then I was officially licensed in 2017. And it is really interesting to then have to try and find your niche, especially because LMHCs were trained to be generalists. So can we really find a niche? And I think it goes into what you're interested in, and having background in training, and looking at who is out there. Really, I started to recognize that, gosh, there's not a lot of people doing this work, and so I can be one of them.
I think that's incredible. I think that's amazing. So, one of the things that we focus on this podcast is the education aspect, and that's really what I want to focus on today. Is the education and the misinformation that is out there about what gender fluidity is. what it means
Mhm.
to be transgender and what are the
Mhm.
misconceptions that
Mhm.
society has.
Yeah. Gosh, that's we could fill up 16 podcasts with just that information. But I would say, education it's everywhere.
Mhm,
You just need to know where to find quality education
mhm,
around the topics that don't feed into some of those misconceptions, myths, what have you. When I talk to even my students about this, is that you are trained to do this work, because I think so often clinicians believe that they are not trained to do the work. It's
mm,
like you have the counseling skills, the basic counseling skills, the enhanced counseling skills. All you need to do differently is to learn specific pieces of information. So,
mhm.
like learning what are the I mean, there's so many different options. Like, what are the requirements to start hormones? What
Okay.
are the requirements to have any type of gender affirming surgery? What does the language look like? Um, I think those are the biggest ones.
Okay.
Um, and then and then you just get that information, you get that knowledge, and there are different places where you can get that. The World Professional Association for Transgender Health. It's shortened to WPATH.
Okay.
They actually train folks to be gender informed counselors.
Okay.
And so you have a lot of trainings that you'll do. I think they make you do 20 credits worth of trainings, and then you do 10 hours of consultation.
Okay.
And then there's an exam.
All right.
And so that's one way. And then just seeking out extra um, continuing education.
Yeah.
There are sample forms out there, there are sample letters out there. Um, WPATH creates a standards of care that
Okay.
goes through kind of here's what you need for this. Like you need two letters if somebody's having gender affirming bottom surgery.
Mhm.
If they're having top surgery, it's one letter. Hormones, you don't need a letter. Like there's a lot of just steps and processes that are important to get and to be aware of is the
Yeah.
first step, I would say.
Yeah.
Um, in terms of misconceptions, I think and you know this, I very much so lead in a cultural relational framework from it within my work, and I
Mhm.
think that that helps me not to make certain assumptions.
Okay.
So some myths that I think can be helpful to dispel is that every trans person is going to have the surgeries, and it's
Hmm.
just like, well, what surgeries?
Yeah.
Some trans folks have no surgery.
No surgeries. Yep.
So I think there's that. I think some of these, not to get into the politics, but there are politics involved in this too, right? But I
Hmm.
think some of the laws that are being proposed are based on misinformation,
Hmm.
right? We don't have, no child is having, bottom surgery. No child is being surgically manipulated, not
Hmm.
without parental consent. And I think the youngest for top surgery is like 16.
Okay.
So we're talking about all these things that people are believing to be true that are not true. No
Hmm.
physician would do those things. They can start blockers, which are completely reversible, um, and then they can switch to cross gender hormone
Okay.
if they're going to start hormone treatment. So I don't know. I guess if you ask me specific questions, I can kind of go into that. I think that
Yeah.
there's just so much information to go
Absolutely.
over. Yeah.
Absolutely. I'm glad that you brought that up because that is something that's talked about, the idea of hormones and taking hormones under
Mhm.
the age of 18. And,
Mhm.
when can a minor make that decision with
Mhm.
their parents' consent? I think
Mhm.
that's a really hot topic. So
Mhm.
I would love to hear from you
Yeah.
what you can share of what you've heard from
Yeah.
clients and clients'
Mhm.
parents about that decision and what goes into making that decision.
Right, right. And I think I always, when I work with a family, when I work with a kiddo, I always work with the family as well,
Mhm.
because I think it's super important for them to feel safe and secure in the decisions that they're making, because they're making a medical decision for their child.
Mhm.
So for me, that might look like a lot of validation,
Mhm.
especially when parents come in. The biggest thing that I hear from parents is just like, I'm a horrible parent because, like, I'm a horrible parent because I don't want my kid to do this. Or
Yeah.
I'm a horrible parent because I hesitate, or I have so many questions and I'm just not sure. And how will I be sure?
Mhm.
Which I is completely valid,
Yeah.
right? There's science that can tell us certain things, but we always know of that 1% or that half a percent or that
Always.
0.01% where something can look different. So when folks come in to see me, especially kids, usually what I start to talk with parents and the kids about are working with a gender informed, trans informed physician, whether it be a pediatrician. Hasbro has a children's gender center that
Oh,
they
okay.
can go to, and really start talking about what are our options.
Mm.
And there are certain times where you might get a kiddo who comes in and they're just like, they're full on puberty,
Yep.
and you're not going to reverse any of that.
Mm.
And so if it's early on and maybe before early stages of puberty, I might talk about, why don't you talk to a physician about hormone blockers
Okay.
and puberty blockers rather. And the blockers have been used for years for folks who more so assign females at birth for precocious puberty, right?
Mhm.
If you start puberty super early,
Yep.
guess what? A physician's not going to let a 6-year-old start their menses, right? They're
Mm.
not going to let a 6-year-old start their cycle. They're going to put a stop to it. And
Yeah.
so we have this long standing history, medical history of um, physicians being able to use puberty blockers to stop that. And so I
Okay.
think when we started to recognize kids were coming out earlier and earlier, I think the physicians and endocrinologists were just like, if we can stop puberty, why are we not using it in this other population?
Mm.
And I think blockers are so helpful for so many kids, and parents feel a little bit more comfortable with it because it gives a kiddo more time to be able to really iterate, this is who I am, this is my
Mm.
gender, without a lot of dysphoria.
Okay.
Because what will happen is they will not they won't start to develop breasts, right?
Okay.
So if we're talking about somebody who's assigned female at birth, they won't start to develop breasts in a way where they're self-conscious. I mean, I think a lot of pubescent cisgender girls go through that, like,
Yes. Yes.
stage in their life. But I can't imagine what it must feel like for somebody who asserts that I'm a boy,
Mm.
and now they start growing breasts, and now
Yeah.
it's like really obvious. And so I think it gives kids a lot more time.
Mhm.
Not I mean, don't want to stay on blockers forever, but it gives them a lot more time to really talk to somebody,
Yeah.
to access gender informed healthcare. Gives parents even a little bit more time to become more comfortable with their decision for their
Absolutely.
kiddo to um, transition
Yeah.
to affirm their gender identity. So I think that's where it starts. I will say the youngest, thinking through my caseload, I've had some kiddos come to me already on cross hormones, and it might have been 14 ish, but
Okay.
everybody's path is so different.
Mhm.
And it's really about making an informed decision alongside healthcare providers who specialize in the field.
Yes. I could not agree more. And with keeping the politics aside, that's why I focus so much on the education,
Mm-hmm.
because I think that there are a lot of misconceptions out there and there's a lot of misinformation. Um,
Absolutely.
and I think that it's important that, knowledge is power, right? The more we know, um,
Mm-hmm.
the better. And with that being a segue, um, obviously a big portion of this podcast is focusing on boundaries. Now,
Right.
there might be parents out there, family
Mm-hmm.
members out there who have a child who is questioning their gender
Yes.
identity.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and they don't know where their boundary is. They don't
Mm-hmm.
know how to appropriately have that conversation um, with that family member. What
Yeah.
advice can you give them?
Ooh, that's a good question. Um, I would ask for some just background information on
Mhm.
how safe the kiddo feels. Like, hey, talk to me about something that you were nervous to tell your guardian another time, or, just kind of explore what the relationship's like. How
Mhm.
does your guardian react when you tell them something that maybe they're going to get upset with? Um, I think a lot of times in and sorry, I'm trying to like replay some of
That's
these
okay.
um clients that I've had. I usually get this is what I usually get with kids, especially. I usually get a phone call from a parent,
Mhm.
usually the mom, and they basically go, my kid just came out as trans, I don't know what to do. And
Mhm.
then they start crying.
Mhm.
And so I try to help accentuate to them, like, hey, I know this is hard. And I'm just, one, I'm proud of you. I'm maybe not proud isn't the best word. I'm so happy that you are seeking help, right? You're
Mhm.
seeking
Yeah.
information. And I usually try to emphasize the fact that, you must have a really good relationship with your kid because they trusted you to
Yeah.
tell you this. It's a really hard thing to tell a parent.
Yeah.
And so I think that tends to alleviate some of the anxieties that they're having. So if I were working with a kid who um, had not disclosed to their guardian and they came to me and it came out in session, something that I traditionally do from the onset of working with a kid is we have a conversation about confidentiality really
Mhm.
quickly. Um, and I usually say, so I'm giving out a trade secret here. No, I usually say to them, hey, listen, there's going to be some times where things come up in session and it might not meet that requirement where I have to disclose to your guardian.
Yep.
And so here's what we're going to do. And here are
Mhm.
the options is we can role play together how you might tell your guardian.
Okay.
I can be there in the space while you tell your guardian, or I can be there with us in the same space and I can tell your guardian.
Okay.
And I think a lot of times that really helps. So I would say if it's a kid that I'm working with who had not already come out, that's the conversation that we would have.
Mm.
And I would just be there to support them with whatever their decision was
Yeah.
on if they wanted to have me disclose, have them disclose, or we would just role play and then we would report back. They would report back with me.
Okay.
Um, but I think there needs to be some trust there and some
Yeah.
courage.
Absolutely.
Mm,
Absolutely. And one of the things that you had said is, a parent would call your office and they would cry. And um I think part of that is grieving the person that was before. And I
absolutely.
think
Hmm.
that people mistake that sometimes for them being not supportive.
Right.
So
Absolutely.
what could you say to somebody out there who may be experiencing this?
Yeah. If you're a guardian and your kiddo comes out, even I would say, like, even if we were to include all of the LGBTQ plus
Yeah.
spectrum. Like if your kid comes out to you as gay, trans, non-binary, that you automatically go into your head and go, am I going to have grandkids? What is this going to look like? Are they going to get
Hmm.
married? What is that going to like? So I think that it's natural for parents and guardians to have this like, oh crap moment. Like
Yep.
I had everything planned out in my head and now that's going to be different.
Yep.
Um, so I do agree with the grief and to maybe seek out somebody to talk through this with. So I've had parents come to me where they're just like, my kid just came out and I don't know what to do about it. I just want to be here so that I can work through my own stuff.
Yeah.
And it was like the most heartfelt experience that I've ever had with a
Oh.
guardian.
Oh.
Um, and it was an adult child and they're just like, I know that I'm initially not okay with it and it's my kid. I don't want to lose my kid and they put a boundary.
Hmm.
And so I'm just like, this is so amazing that you're doing this. So I'll
Yeah.
typically suggest there are some books out there that you can read.
Okay.
Um, there are um, the TGI network. It's transgender information. I can't remember all the
Okay.
acronym.
Yep.
But it's a TGI network. They hold parent groups.
Okay.
So I would say like let's access some additional resources. Go to a
Mhm.
parent group. Go to a guardian group. And I think the power in the group is that the guardian will then go, somebody else felt the exact same way that I do. Maybe
Yeah.
not exactly to the T, but somebody just said that thing that I thought in my head and I wouldn't let out.
Yeah.
And so maybe I'm not a bad parent. Maybe
Hmm.
this is just my process.
Yeah.
Right. So I would suggest getting on, a Facebook closed group or um, accessing a group support or individual therapist. And to be open and honest with those people about your concerns.
Hmm.
And I would say to not do that with your kid.
Yeah.
That's the
That's
biggest
that's big.
piece.
That's
Yeah.
big. And can you explain to people why it's a good idea not to do it with their kid?
I think the kid is already going through so much,
Mm-hmm.
and they might view that as, "Ugh, they're not going to support me. They're asking all these questions, and they're the person who needs to give me permission to go and do this thing."
Hmm.
Or they might internalize that, oh, I'm not going to be able to have a relationship with this person because they don't see me for who I am, my authentic
Hmm.
self.
Yeah.
So I think it could just be so much more damaging. And then it might lead to a child. Um, we have black market for everything. Like it could be a child then going in secret and getting hormones on the black market, which can be really lethal and deadly.
Yeah.
Um, Sometimes I am very blunt with my guardians that come to me.
That's
And
one of the
so
things I like about
sometimes,
you.
well, thanks. I mean, I have had conversations with guardians at some point, especially if they're really like rigid on this. And I'll say, you know, I get it. And to be real with you, you're either going to have a trans kid or you're going to have a dead kid. And
Hmm.
we know the suicidality and suicide rate for transgender folks is high compared to our cis population if we were to look at it percentage wise, right?
Hmm.
Obviously that I think there obviously is more cis folks um, than trans folks, but I think in that population especially that I can count so many of my clients who are just like, I didn't even think I'd make it past 20, and that's a really
Oof, that's
difficult thing to
powerful.
hear. Yeah.
Yeah. Wow.
So I do tend to, especially if I have a resistant guardian, I'll be
Hmm.
like, listen, you can either have a trans kid, or either will have a kid who will not speak to you ever again, or they won't be around. And I
Yeah.
think that's hard for guardians to hear, but also so needed.
Mm. And what types of reactions do you get from saying something like that?
I think, again, well, not again, but it has been few and far between for me,
Hmm.
to have that conversation, and to state that fact in that way. Um, I think you just get a lot of quiet. Like I've never been yelled at for a parent for that, by a parent for that,
Keyword for that.
for that. But I think it's a reality that is needed. They need to hear, and they don't want to hear it. And
Yeah.
so I think it can be really challenging to
Yeah.
hear. So,
Yeah.
mm,
Thank you for sharing that. That's definitely,
yeah.
it's hard to hear. But
Hmm.
it's again powerful part of that education. So I
Hmm.
want to go back to something that you said before and start very
Hmm.
basically. You used non-binary. Can you
Hmm.
define what non-binary is for our listeners?
Oh, goodness. Okay. So, somebody who comes to me and says they're non binary, it means that, listen, I'm not, I'm not either. I don't operate on this binary. Because binary is like, we know, like, and it's all in gender, um, characterizations, or not characterizations, but it's all rooted in like femininity and masculinity, right?
Okay.
And so we can recognize that, that we have like uber men and really girly girls, right? And so I think that when I hear somebody say that they're non-binary, they're like, I was born with these parts, and I don't really feel like a girl, or I don't really feel like a boy. I'm kind of neither. Or
Hmm.
a lot of my the other thing that I find to be, and this is something that my clients have said to me, they're like, "Listen, I'm definitely not a girl,
Okay.
but I don't know if I'm a boy." It's like,
Okay.
I think for a lot of folks, so I'm thinking about some of the folks that I work with who are assigned female at birth but identify as non-binary. They're just like, I'd rather read masculine than feminine.
Hmm. Okay.
Like
So
they'd rather,
So
yeah.
that, yeah, okay. I get what you're saying. So to play devil's advocate, one of the things that is said often is um interests versus identity. Is your
Mhm.
Are your interests in subject matters and masculine and feminine um interests, whatever have they be, um does does that have a reflection, or should it, on your gender?
I don't think so.
Mm.
Um and that one's hard, right? So I guess I go back to some of those charts where it's just, when we started to de-gender, if you will, toy stores, right? If you go into
Yes.
Target
Yep.
now,
Yep.
it's not like girl toys and boy toys. And I would kind of go back to, like, I don't know if you've ever seen that flow chart. It's like, is it a girl toy or a boy toy? It's like, do you use your genitals to play with it? And it's like, yes or no. And it's just like,
Uh,
then it doesn't matter what it is, right?
I've
It's
never seen
like,
that. That's funny. Yeah.
it's a good
No.
one. And then
Yep. There
it's
you
just
go.
like, and then it's just like, if the answer is yes to that question, it's like, then it's not appropriate for a child. So it kind of,
Yep.
so I think interests, I don't think it's necessarily like I'm interested in these feminine things. It's more about their identity and how,
Mm.
really how they feel on the inside.
Yep.
Um, where they're just like, and it could be related to that, like, right, being pushed into, oh, you must wear pink, you must take ballet, you must do this, that, and the other.
Yeah.
And so they might have always felt like, oh, I don't really like that, or I don't identify with the things that people who present this way, typically are into or like. but they
Okay.
can't, they can say it for both, I think both of the binaries
Mm,
of boy and girl. So
okay.
it's really somebody who's not like a gender, because a gender, they have no gender.
Hmm.
It's more somebody who's kind of like, I can't, I don't align with either. I don't
Okay.
feel like a girl. I don't feel like a boy. I'm just me. I'm
Okay.
somewhere in between.
Okay.
Yeah.
And what is agender?
Agender is I don't have a gender. There is no gender. It's
Is
like
that, does that
somebody,
mean like
yeah.
ever, or they're fluid, they're constantly fluid?
Um, they they might not even be fluid. So we have so you're bringing up really good topics or questions because language changes very
Hmm.
often in this
Yes.
field. So we have folks who identify as gender fluid, where they might present masculine one day, they might present feminine another day, they might be androgynous the next day. They're just gonna kind of play all around, right?
Yeah.
Because it's how I feel when I wake up, and it's what I want to wear. And then you'll have folks who are gender creative, very similar, but they might actually, I'm going to say mismatch, right? So it might be somebody who has a full beard, and has their makeup done, wearing a dress, and it's kind of like, okay, you're blending things, and that's just how they present. That's how they feel comfortable, and it's how they identify. Um, and then there are so many other terms, like
Mm.
it's, I always tend to, and I know I shared this with y'all in class, but I tend to not give people options on how they identify. I ask them to identify themselves
And why
because
is that?
I don't want them to not have an option. I don't want them to click, "Oh, I'm other." What does
Hmm.
other mean? I have to now explain it. So I'd rather give folks the flexibility and the autonomy to self identify without
Hmm.
me saying, "Are you this? Are you that? Are you," you know?
Yeah.
And I really do appreciate that. And I think my clients do as well. I've had clients say, "Oh, you didn't make me choose. You get it." So I think that's super important too, because I'm going to um, move and flex with whatever it is. However you identify is how I'm going to refer to
Hmm.
you.
Hmm.
So
Absolutely.
so yeah, so it's I think when we're talking about non-binary folks, it's more so folks who don't align with masculinity or femininity. They're just kind of there.
Hmm.
And I will say for more of my, like I said, so AFAB folks are people who are assigned female at birth.
Hmm.
More of my AFAB folks who are non-binary are just like, I'm non-binary. Um, I don't really like guys, so I don't want to be read as a guy, but I definitely don't want to be read as a girl. Like I
Mm.
don't want
Okay.
people to see me as a girl.
Okay.
So,
All right.
hmm
That's
and
interesting.
if I'm to put my conceptualization hat on, it's likely because they were pushed into all those girl things
Yep.
because of the body parts that they were born with.
Hmm. Understandable. And what would you
Mm.
say to those people that are out there that say the body parts that you're born with is what you are?
Mm. I would challenge them that gender is a social construct.
Mm.
There's a shirt that has that, and I want to buy it. I need it. But gender is a social construct, and it's the difference between identifying sex versus gender, and
Mm.
sex is more our chromosomes, our gonads, our body parts, all that stuff. And gender is how we show up in the world, how we present, how we dress, how we our mannerisms, it could be. And so yeah, that's what I would say is like your body parts don't always have much to do with, again, how you're presenting in the world,
Mhm.
unless unless you're maybe in a nudist colony, right? Nobody needs to know what's in those spaces.
Yep.
So I think that's a big part of it. And then to recognize that, to add in a whole nother term, um, looking at our intersex community. So
Mm.
intersex folks are born with what we would consider woman and men parts, and it could be, there. I think there are 17 or 18 different combinations and ways in which somebody can be diagnosed as intersex.
Oh,
So
wow.
some folks, they'll have, and a lot of times they don't know this until later in life. So you could have somebody who's born and they appear male because they might have a penis and testicles. And then down the road, they're kind of like, oh, I don't feel, and they might also have ovaries. Or you could have somebody who's born with what appears to be a vagina, and they might have testes that have grown inside of them, right?
Mm.
And so there's a lot of, and it can be hormonal.
Yep.
So we know that we have some people who are assigned female at birth that have a higher level, and they produce testosterone, right? That would be somebody who could be diagnosed as intersex. Um, and it's a lot of times it goes undiagnosed because we don't do a full scan of somebody when they're born.
Exactly. Yeah.
Um, and a lot of other times, we've we have a long history of pediatricians and doctors who, when children are born, if they do have visibly both genitalia, in one way, shape, or form, they will heavily encourage, I don't even like using that word. They will basically tell parents, you need to make a choice. And then we need to perform surgery on your child,
Wow.
so that they have a good life. And what we've begin to explore and understand is that so many times, they've made the wrong choice. And so we have a kiddo who was born intersex but was forced into, say, woman, and then they're going through their development and they're like, oh my gosh, I'm trans. And come to find out they're not trans. They
Mm.
just were, they made the wrong choice. Like the
Oh,
physicians and the family made the wrong choice.
I can't imagine that. That has to be so difficult
Mm-hmm.
for everybody
Mm-hmm.
involved.
Mm-hmm.
That's
Absolutely. I do know that there is a movement, though, where parents have been more educated about this, and um, they will refuse surgery. They'll say, you know what, we're good. We're going to let our child develop, and we're going to let them tell us what is the best path for them. And I really applaud parents for being advocates for their children,
mm,
knowing that there could be complications down the road in terms of their mental health, or even then, trying to grapple with, am I trans, and how do I then tell everybody,
yeah.
so. Mhm.
Yeah. That's hard. That's hard. Thank you for
Mhm.
sharing that.
Yeah.
Um I think that's really important as well, and that's definitely something that isn't talked about even near as much as things that are, on the news and brought up because of
Mhm.
politics and things like that. That's a
Yeah.
really, really important topic.
Mhm. Yeah.
So is there something that you would like to end this podcast with, for Pride Month, just to
Mhm.
let people out there know how, I guess what I'm getting at is one of my values is that, you know what,
Mhm.
never everyone's never going to agree, but that
Mhm.
doesn't mean that you shouldn't be respectful.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
I would like to put
Mhm.
that out there. I would like to end on that note, on how how people, I know this sounds crazy, but how people can be respectful to those
Yeah.
in the trans community, because some people need a little help learning how to be respectful.
Mm-hmm. True. Very true. Um, I would say, to do, and this also comes, it, it's a question that I could take 16 podcasts talking about again, right?
Yeah.
But I think for the first thing is to, you know, really hear your person,
Mhm.
whoever it is. If they say, I'm not going by that name anymore, honor and respect that, right? Don't say, well, I named you and I'm not going to call you that,
Mhm.
right? Because that's just going to shut that person out from you.
Yep.
Um, in terms of pronoun usage, like try. I think that's all folks are asking for you to do is to
Mhm.
try.
Mhm.
And then on the flip side, when you make a mistake, don't over apologize, because then now you're putting the responsibility on the person that you just misgendered to then
To forgive
forgive
you.
you.
Mhm.
So just I move forward,
Mhm.
edit it. If you say, "Oh, well I mean he," and just move on. You
Yep.
don't have to make it about you. Just move
Yep.
on.
Yeah.
But I think, if I'm to think of the narratives of my clients, it's for people to try is
Mhm.
super important. If even if you don't agree, like, it's not your business. Don't ask questions that are really inappropriate. Don't ask people, "Oh, well, what surgeries have you had?" or anything. It's not your business. If you're not
Mhm.
sleeping with that person, don't ask them,
Yeah.
right? Um and to just really honor that person as you would want to be honored if you were, whatever you just respect people how you want to be respected.
Yeah. I think that's beautifully put. Dr. Michelle Crossley, thank you so much for being with us today. We really appreciate it. And if somebody wanted to find you for education or for practice, how could they find you?
Psychology Today.
Psychology Today. Perfect. All right. Well, thank you so much. And thank you all for listening today to Bring Boundaries. Your host, Lindsay Idaluca, and we'll see you next time.